Welcome back to the Departure Lounge. This is a Leaving Well live experiment to see how we can bring conversations with really incredible experts that are adjacent to the work that we do, adjacent and intertwined. I don't want to just say adjacent. We are excited to talk to Heather Burright next of Skill Masters Market. We are going to talk all about the topic of, can you actually train your way out of a transition? I've talked with Heather many times. We've been doing podcast episodes and we've talked about learning and development. So Heather, will you kick us off by just telling a little bit about you and your work, where people can find you, so we make sure that we get that in there too. And then we'll just have a casual chat about all things learning and development and training.
Yeah, first of all, Naomi, thank you for doing this and thank you for including me in this. I am very excited. I got to catch a little bit of Veronica's earlier, but it's just such a great group of people that you've brought together and such an important topic. So thank you. I'm Heather Burright, founder of Skill Masters Market. I have a world of instructional design experience. I've been in that space for about 20 years. And what I love to do is actually combine that particular experience with individual and organizational change principles so that nonprofits have the training their mission deserves and the tools to implement it effectively. I find that often people, when we're creating training, we're focused on how adults learn or what the content is, what people need to know, right? But there's this whole other piece, this whole other body of work around how people change. And so that's my goal always, is to marry those things so that we're taking advantage of how people learn, but also how people change. And we get to actually see success on the other end. As far as where to find me, LinkedIn is a great place. I'm active here. I also have a private community, the nonprofit L&D Collective, and I have a podcast, Learning for Good. So all easy ways to find me and learn more.
That's fantastic. And I also love, there's this already a thread that's coming through all the conversations we've had so far about how do individual people change. Yeah. And it's not just that you can apply this large thing over the top of everyone. So I'm so glad that you are bringing that to this stage as well. So I'm just going to kick it over to you to kind of get us started and share a little bit more about your thoughts on, can folks train their way out of transition?
It's a great question, and it's a familiar question to me, right? So I'm going to start actually with a little bit of a thesis statement, and then we'll unpack it. So leadership transitions create performance challenges, not necessarily learning problems. So training may be part of the solution, but it rarely solves the problem alone. So that's my thesis, and we'll see how we unpack this if you agree with me at the end. But if you're with me, if anybody is watching live, if you're with me, type "I'm with you" in the comments so that I know that you're going to go on this journey with me. So here is kind of a common situation, and Naomi, feel free to weigh in if this feels right to you. You see a lot more transitions even than I do. So a leader leaves, right? A new leader takes over. Maybe it's interim, maybe it's a new person coming in. People are uncertain, priorities shift, and performance starts to dip. It's a little bit like someone handing you the keys to a car when you're already driving 70 miles per hour on the highway, right? Like, the car didn't stop moving. The mission still needs to be fulfilled. Teams still have work to do. But suddenly everybody's trying to figure out who's actually driving. Like, how are we getting there? Who's navigating this car? And it didn't stop for those questions to be answered. And when this happens, there is just this lack of certainty, lack of clarity, right? And what's the first thing organizations ask for? Training, right? We need a communication workshop. We need a manager training. We need a change management class. So does that sound familiar? You're nodding your head, Naomi. Is that?
It's so familiar. It's so familiar. And it's always reactive as well. Yeah.
For sure. And I mean, I create training for a living. I love training. It's literally what I do. But what if training isn't actually the thing that's missing? And so that's why I want to talk about what actually creates this kind of performance continuity during leadership transitions, and why learning has an important role, what that role is, and how it only works when it's connected to strategy. So I kind of want to start by just thinking through, like you were nodding your head. I have seen it time and time again, right? Training is the default to so many different challenges that we see in our organizations. And so I kind of want to unpack that a little bit. Like, why is that? Why is training everyone's first instinct? And I think it's mostly because it's familiar, right? It's comfortable. Everyone has attended a training at some point in their career. A lot of people have even created training before, right? So it feels comfortable, it feels familiar, and it's easy to kind of reach to training.
Mm-hmm. It's also, Heather, it's also the thing that we start our jobs with is a whole lot of training to onboard. And so it's just baked into the work that we do is training. Yeah.
And it's easy to check the box, right? I did that. Check. We offer training. So, and it's not just nonprofits. According to some 2024 Harvard Business Review data, companies spend I think it was $350 billion on training every single year, right? Some of that moves the needle and some of it doesn't.
Right.
And I've really lost count of the number of times that a stakeholder has started a conversation with me by saying, we need a training, right? It's jumping to the solution versus spending time thinking about, well, what problem are we trying to solve? And so training isn't necessarily wrong. It just isn't always the best solution or the only solution, right? Training can work. It can solve performance challenges. It can create and kind of facilitate the change process, but it can't be the only solution. And it has to be tied to reality, and it has to be tied to strategy. And
I'm curious, Heather, what's the arc of when that leader comes to you or that decision maker comes to you to say, I think we need a training? How long is the arc typically for you to then come back to them and say, hold on just a moment. Is it a quicker process? Is it long process? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It varies a little bit, but I will say that typically by the time a leader gets to someone who designs training, it's internal learning and development or a consultant or whatever, typically it's later than it needs to be for when that conversation even starts. Learning and development sits in a very unique position inside an organization where we can see so many different layers that other people don't see. And we work cross-functionally across any organization that we're in. And so I think even in the beginning, even when you start to see we're going through a change, right? There's going to be a change, or there's a performance challenge. Even before jumping to the training solution, early in that process, bringing in learning and development to say, here's our goals. Here's what we know is coming. Here's what we're seeing, right? If you can involve learning and development early, then you're going to get to a better solution more quickly. But for me, to your point, once that conversation starts, how long does it take? It can be very quick sometimes if the leader is receptive to having the conversation. And I think it really comes down to that. How much influence am I bringing? How much trust and credibility already exists when I say, yes, I can create a training for you, but but's not the right word there. And let's talk about what the actual problem is, right? And so it just depends on how receptive that leader is, how long that takes to get there.
Well, and I love that you bring in kind of the but/and of, yes, of course I can. And there's some deeper work that comes into play. I'm curious how easy it is or what the process is for you to draw that line between training and strategy when you have maybe a group of folks who aren't the decision maker, because I imagine folks will be watching this that feel like they're not the one that has the option to bring in a trainer or to bring in you to support their team. Are there any tips or tricks you would give those folks?
Oh, that's an interesting perspective, Naomi. And I don't want to misguide them. I'm trying to think through, if I were sitting in their shoes, what would be my first step? I think that if you're not the decision maker, leaning on your own trust and credibility that you've built within the organization, leading into your own influence that you have, and starting those conversations with your supervisors, with leadership to say, hey, I'm seeing this particular challenge. I know this particular change is coming. How can we make sure that people have what they need to be successful with it? And really speaking the language of the leaders that do have the decision-making power. It might be based on something that you are seeing and a pain point that you are feeling, but not necessarily approaching it from that lens so much as, I know this is important to you. Mm-hmm. Why don't we have a conversation about how we can best support that?
I love that. Yeah, that's so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. You were in the middle of flow and I interrupted you.
You're all good. You are all good. I love this. I love having these conversations. So interrupt anytime. I think, the thing that I see time and time again is training for training's sake. And like I said, it's easy to check the box and say, well, we're going through this change. We offer training. Everybody should know what to do. Right. And training generally is not meant to be training for training's sake, right? I get that there are compliance trainings. I get that there are things that you're like, no, but really we just have to do that cybersecurity training. And even still, it should not be training for training's sake, but I understand that the compliance mindset. But most of the time, training is meant to solve a problem. It's meant to create a change, right? It's meant to build skills and capability. It's meant to increase confidence. And we'll talk a little bit about that. People don't usually stop performing during a transition because they suddenly lack the knowledge or lack the skill. Performance drops because people lose clarity during a transition. And so if you think back to like the driving analogy, right? We're driving down the road 70 miles per hour. Let's imagine you're doing that and your GPS suddenly, like your phone loses signal, your GPS glitches, you no longer know where you're headed, right? You still know how to drive. That didn't go away. You haven't forgotten how to brake or steer. You're just no longer confident that you're headed in the right direction. And so that's what a leadership transition often feels like for people. We didn't just lose capability overnight. We lost that direction. And people aren't sure, what matters now? Who makes the decisions? What is changing? What's staying the same? What does success even look like through all of this? And none of those things are solely training problems. And so what I would like to do is kind of think through what are those things that create performance continuity? And then how does learning fit? Where can it support that? And where maybe is it not the right fit to support that? And you please jump in on these things. I'm going to share 4 C's, but there may be other things that you're like, oh, and this, we need this.
Yeah. No, go for it. Let's do the 4 C's. I'm like rapidly taking notes, so we may have more to talk about, but please do that.
Okay. So the 4 C's, the first is clarity. Second is consistency. The third is confidence. And the fourth is capability. So clarity.
Did you say confidence or competence?
Confidence. Yeah. So clarity. Does everyone understand the mission, the strategy during the transition? Have priorities changed? What decisions can people continue making? And what's changing there, right? So that clarity, learning can reinforce it, but it doesn't create it. That clarity often comes from leadership. There are probably exceptions there, but that clarity has to exist. Learning can then reinforce it. The second is consistency. So this is things like, are your managers sending the same message? Are expectations changing from team to team? Does it look one way in one place and a different way somewhere else? Does everyone understand what good performance really looks like? So learning can help build consistency across leaders, but those expectations have to be defined first. So, and oftentimes as learning and development, when I'm working with an organization and working with a client, right, there are times that I'm helping kind of sort through and figure out what those expectations should be. So we can be a partner in that, but the expectations have to be clear before learning can create that consistency. And then the third one was confidence. So this is a little bit almost culture related, I would say. What are people worried about? what behaviors are starting to feel risky to them? Where are people hesitating because they're afraid to make decisions or take action? Sometimes people know exactly what to do. They're just kind of afraid to do it, right? And so that is a little bit of a culture piece, is that trust still exists. Learning can support confidence building, especially as someone increases their skills and their practices those skills. It can increase confidence. It can also foster trust, but culture is bigger than learning. And then the last one was capability. So once people have clarity, once those expectations are consistent, what skills actually need to change? And so now when we get to this point, learning has a clear purpose, right? It's not just like, oh, we need a training, we should train everyone. But we've identified what that capability gap is. And now we can create learning experiences that build skills, that reinforce expectations, that foster trust and build consistency across that organization. But that is a much more strategic approach to learning than to say, let's just provide a training. Let's just throw a workshop at it.
I also love, Heather, even the simple naming convention shift away from training and towards learning experience. That helps. I mean, even my brain, just hearing you say that a couple times, makes it feel more like it's built for me to get through and to weather this transition, for example. And I also love that you brought up that question around like what feels risky, what are your people worried about, and where is the trust bridge? Where has it been interrupted? And that is such a big part of leadership transition. So I love the 4 C's. I'm so glad that you brought those. I do have a question around the what is success and who's making decisions right now that you were talking about. Do you have any tips or tricks for folks on how to identify what success looks and feels like during a leadership transition?
So my tip is going to be to ask. Maybe that's too simple or too.
No.
It's one of the questions that I think good learning and development folks should always ask is, what does success look like? But I think the same applies in any role that you're in, right? Like, we're going through this process. What does success look like? I am stepping back into a leadership role within the parent-teacher organization at my child's school, and there's a new principal. And so one of the first things we did was we sat down with the principal and said, what does success look like to you? What do you want this group to be? How do you want it to contribute to whatever you're working toward with the school, right? And so if we don't have that conversation, if we're not willing to engage in that conversation, we don't know. We don't know what success looks like. We don't know what good looks like.
Yeah.
There's a saying, and I did not coin this, but I've used it for probably about 20 years in learning and development. The biggest killer of performance is unclear expectations. So if we don't know what good looks like, we can't achieve it.
Yeah.
And so being willing to have those conversations, I think, is super important for anyone in the organization. And it's important for anyone designing learning as well.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think too about even talking about the PTA. What a great example of constant turnover. You know, you're not going to still be in that role when your child is no longer in that grade grouping. And PTA binders are a thing for a reason. It's because we are handing over the learning that we had from our past to the next person. And I love that you just directly asked the principal, what does this need to look and feel like for you? That's fabulous. Yeah. I
mean, we want to build a strong relationship with the principal. And so we need to know what that looks like. So, But to your point, though, I think asking, I often joke that my job is to ask questions. I think that is such an important part of this whole process and this whole conversation. I think, early in my career, when I kind of fell into learning and development, most of us do. That's a hidden secret. But early in my career, I thought my job was to build really good training, right? That's what I thought I was there for. So if someone asked me for a workshop, I was going to build the best workshop I could. And over time, I realized that something was missing. That wasn't enough. Good training doesn't always create good results. And so I shifted how I approach every project. And working in a national nonprofit was definitely part of that, to see how things work, the collaborative nature, the nuance of federated organizations, and the watching leadership transitions happen, right? Like all of those things kind of played into how I think about learning now. And I know that I need to spend more of my time understanding the business problem than actually designing the learning.
Yeah.
Right. So now as a learning consultant coming in kind of from the outside, so to speak, one of the hardest but most rewarding parts of the job, it's not designing learning. I love designing learning, but it's slowing down the conversation enough to ask better questions and to figure out what is that problem or pain point that people are experiencing, or what is that opportunity or change that's coming, and how can I kind of help to diagnose that so that the learning will be stronger on the other side, so that the leader gets the results that they're looking for. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it feels really potent, that piece that you just said about slowing down, because I think in leadership transition, it always feels like there's a fire, like it's urgent, chaotic, and complex. So I love the reminder to slow down.
Yeah, it's so important. If you think about, like, when you go to the doctor, maybe some of you do, but you likely aren't going in and saying, this is what I have, give me this medication, right? You're saying, here's what I'm experiencing. Here are my symptoms. And then the doctor is using their experience, their expertise, their training to say, okay, let me put these symptoms together. Let me think about what I know about you. And okay, here's what I think might be happening. Let's try this. Right. And so that diagnosis is an essential part of that process. Now, you may be going to ChatGPT or wherever now for all of your medical questions, right? But in theory, ChatGPT is doing the same thing. And you take that to the doctor and say, here's what I think is happening. That doctor is still sorting through your symptoms and trying to figure out what's the best solution for you.
Yeah.
So some of the questions, to your point, like questions that we should be asking that help me get to a diagnosis, what is the performance that needs to continue? What has to stay the same? What do we have to protect? And then on that same kind of other side of that coin, what has to change? What behaviors need to change? What systems, processes, what's going to change? And then what are the obstacles that will prevent that from happening? Sometimes it's skill. A lot of times it's maybe supervisor buy-in or systems, environment, right? There are any number of reasons that someone doesn't follow through on whatever that is. And so I think identifying what is that gap. Is it knowledge? Is it skill? Is it motivation? Is it something outside of their control? You can then design for that. So that's part of it. And then I think, getting really, really clear, what is it that you need people to do differently? What is that problem we're trying to solve? What does success look like? What are people doing differently to achieve that? Like that right there allows you to get a very clear diagnosis before designing any sort of learning. And that's what helps you navigate a transition with learning as a strategic lever, right? It doesn't create the strategy, but it enables it.
I also love to think about, and this came up during Veronica's conversation too, around the ripple effect that you are basically launching by doing this really intensive work that's connected to strategy. Because people leave, you're also then letting those folks take that same learning to their next role. And so the ripple that you are bringing, Heather, to the work that you do with clients around slowing down, around tying it to strategy, is just such a big, huge ripple of that stone that hits and sends it out into the universe. So I'm so thrilled to hear you talk about that. And there's a comment from Jen, who's watching live, that said, you could teach a lot of doctors about asking the right questions.
That's fair.
So true.
That's fair.
Time flies by so fast. We could talk for another hour, and we barely touched any of the things that you bring to the table. What do you want the people that are listening or watching the replay to think most about when they think about trainings, workshops, and maybe starting to not try and throw workshops on problems and instead think more strategically?
Yeah. I want to go back to a belief and then maybe what that looks like. So I honestly believe that learning is a strategic lever for your organization, transition or not. It doesn't create the strategy, but it does enable it. And so when we can, and this is kind of the more action-oriented piece, right? When we can align leadership, communication, systems, and learning with strategy, man, imagine what that would do for your organization. And so learning needs to be at the table, a part of the conversation, not for training's sake, but because of the strategic advantage it can bring to your organization.
Where can people find you again, Heather, so they can come do really beautiful strategic learning experiences for their organizations?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn, I'm active on LinkedIn. That's a great place to find me. The Learning for Good podcast is a place where I share a lot of these thoughts. And then the nonprofit L&D Collective is my private community specifically for anyone creating training inside of a nonprofit.
Fabulous. And we'll get some links shared in the LinkedIn live section. We'll also be sharing links when we get this all up on YouTube. Heather, thanks so much for joining us and sharing all about your wisdom and your expertise when it comes to learning experiences and bringing that inside of our leadership transitions, which is a reality for all of us.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you for including me.
Thanks so much. So we'll be up next with Corey Oberden talking about comm strategies. Again, this was a really lovely conversation with Heather. We hope you stay tuned for the next conversation.